The Salaf is that should be a part of our common vocabulary as Muslims. And that literally Salafa means to come before. But as a technical term, when we speak of the Salaf, that we speak of the early generation of the companions, the Tabi'een and the Tabi'een. And it could be in certain contexts used for early people. And in very specific contexts, in some scholar traditions, the Salaf are referred to anyone that came before the present time. So it depends upon what we mean by the term, but in general, is that part of our deen is to love the Salaf, to love the people that came before us. That this is from Iman, and that it's actually that very dangerous to start having a bad opinion of people that came before us, or to be so affected by the modern world such that we think that, you know, the reality that we live is so much different than the reality that they lived, is that there is no guidance that could be bequeathed to us from these earlier generations because of the time in which we live. And that this is a knot of nonsense. Is that there are numerous parallels between what they were going through in their time and what we are going through in our time. And in many ways, as Sheikh Walid pointed out, is that their time was more difficult than our time. Their time in many ways was more difficult than our time. That if you look at something like the Mongol invasion, imagine living in Central Asia during the Mongol invasion. Imagine living in Central Asia in the Mongol invasion, when they would invade the towns, they would rape the women, kill all of the men, and literally stack skulls up of dead people. And blood would be flowing in the street, and they would burn everything and spare virtually no one. In many of these places that they stormed through, is that never ever recovered. They're buried in dust to this day because they never ever recovered from the Mongol invasion. This is one of the greatest tribulations, right, in the history of Islam. Right? But what's interesting to note, and we'd mentioned this before, but I think it's such an important point, especially in our time, is that a person like Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, who is one of the greatest poets of Islam, one of the champions of the love of God and an approach to God through love, and his poetry is amazing, that we should read and that we should benefit from, and that his epithet being referred to as a Rumi, that Jalaluddin the Roman, it stems from that his being buried ultimately in the Anatolian Peninsula in Turkey, in the city, excuse me, that Sayyidina Maulana, he's from Balkh though, and that area of Afghanistan was that known to be a center of Buddhism, that in pre-Islamic times, and Islam spread there that over a period of centuries. But you have a number of factors that led up to Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi being who he was, and then the unique contribution that he made, that even though he did speak Arabic and he was a great scholar and his father was a great scholar, is that he was one of the most amazing poets in the Persian language. And that he left Balkh, one of the reasons that he left was because of the news that was reaching him of the Mongol invasion. And as he went west rather, that he eventually meets with Attar, that one of the other great poems of the Persian literary tradition, and that his teacher Attar, that recognized that this person was special, just as that the Sheikh who pollinated his soul, that Shams Tabriz, also recognized the same thing, and saw him early on in his life and then met with him at a later time. But the point of all this is Attar was killed by the Mongols. And there's not one reference in the entire Mithnawi to the Mongol invasion. There's not one reference in all of the 1,000 lines of poetry of the Mithnawi of the Mongol invasion. It's inconceivable that he wasn't aware of it. One of his main teachers, and that, you know, someone that he looked up to dearly, that Attar, died at the hands of the Mongols, and they fled west because of the Mongols. This is why they ends up in Konya in Turkey, and that Turkey was also a center, and Konya was a center of Islamic learning at that time and of culture. And you had the students, one of the great students of Sheikh al-Akbar, also there, and that amazing things happening here. But the point here is that he knew what was happening. What was that perspective of that particular individual that allows him to continue doing what he's doing, and these massacres are taking place that are unprecedented, that nothing that is happening now compares to what was happening then. As horrible and treacherous and terrible as things are now. I'm not trying to say that things are not horrible. Right? As we enjoy ourselves in the beautiful weather here and are about to go eat breakfast in that Toronto. But my point here is though, what was that understanding that he had? That there's not one reference, there's not one complaint. And he still writes the Mathnawi. So these people that are complaining that there's too many teachers here smiling on Facebook because these people, okay, what are we supposed to do? Like frown the whole time? Just be, mean to people and not smile ever again in our lives? Or are we supposed to understand that we are here in this particular, Allah has put us here. We did not put ourselves here. We are here right now in this moment. And we are required before our Lord to do what is right in any given moment. And our goal here in this particular moment and in our particular communities is to have iqamat ad-deen, establish this deen. We have to establish the deen in our own selves, in our own families, in our communities. And if we do that, it is not only a success for us, it is a success for the entire ummah of the Prophet ﷺ. That yes, we should be deeply tortured and pained by everything that is happening to any human being that is by way of injustice and wrong in the world. Yes, especially with Muslims, that we should be especially pained and be inside, because Muslims are like one body. However, we cannot let anything that is happening anywhere worldwide, even though we have a collective history of Muslims, and every individual history is a part of the collective history of Muslims, that we cannot let that prevent us from doing what we need to do. Is that we have to have iqamat deen here, in these lands, in our own lives. And that no matter what is happening in the world, nothing can preoccupy us from that. And that if we let things preoccupy us from that, and we have a reckless type of activism that is not well thought out, and that is passionate and closer to the lower, the caprice of the lower soul, is that in and of itself is not going to help the situation. Right? What is going to help the situation ultimately is people returning back to the deen. And that it's a very simple equation. The source of all ibtila and bala, the source of all tribulation for us, is turning away from the teachings of Sayyidina Muhammad bin Abdullah. This is a universal, and in any given time, when Muslims turn back to the deen, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, He will change their condition. There is no way to change the condition of Muslims in the world without iqamat ad-deen, without establishing the deen. There is no other way. And that part of the reason that we are in the situation that we're in collectively is because people have turned away from Islam. And they've turned away from this deen. This is the source of our honor, and this is the source of our success in the dunya and the akhirah. And without that understanding, there is no victory. No matter how involved we are in politics, no matter how many activist tendencies that we have, unless all of that is coupled with this understanding, that it's going to be of very, very little benefit, and if we don't have the right intentions, it's going to make things worse. And we have to understand this. Why didn't think about this? Maulana Rumi was aware of what was happening in the Mongol invasion. Not one reference. Not one reference. And none of the ulama of his time said that, why aren't you talking about the Mongol invasion? Why isn't your book only focused upon activism and gathering armies together to be able to fight the Mongols? Why wasn't that their understanding? We should really take heed to this. We should really take heed. Right? Look at Salah ad-Din Ayyubi. Look at the period that preceded Salah ad-Din Ayyubi. Look at the whole reason that Imam al-Ghazali authored the Ihya Ulumuddin. That what was their understanding? They understood very clearly, without self-transformation, there is no way for our condition outwardly to transform. This is set in stone, period. This is the way that it was for the early period, and this is the way it is for our period and every period in between. Without this understanding, we quite simply cannot move forward.